Welcome to Bobby Owsinski's Inner Circle. I'm Bobby Owsinski, and this is a show all about music, music production, and the music business. My guest today is the great legendary engineer Ed Cherney. But first of all, CD sales are falling, and they're falling fast. According to Nielsen's mid-year report, there are just 3 albums this year that have sold more than 1 million, which is way, way, way down from past years. As a matter of fact, it's the worst year since 1991 when SoundScan, which Nielsen now owns, first began counting record sales. CDs are down about 12% this year, again, and only about 50 million have sold. And what's worse, we're hearing from bands and artists just about everywhere that their CDs aren't selling at their live gigs anymore either. So once upon a time, those CDs might not have been counted by SoundScan, by Nielsen, but the fact of the matter is, they were still being sold. So there was still a lot of CDs that were out there that just weren't showing up in the total figures. That's pretty much gone away, though, as we're hearing more and more. People just don't want those round pieces of plastic any longer. People are still buying vinyl, however. But, vinyl really doesn't account for as much as you might think. The top seller this year so far is David Bowie's last record. But that's only sold 57,000, so that's not really a lot. So even though vinyl is up, it's really a drop in the bucket compared to everything else. That being said, revenue is way up from streaming, so much so that Sony is making $25 million per week just from streaming. That's about $3.3 million per day from streaming only, and this is only going up. And it's also for all the major record labels and also the indies as well, so streaming is taking over, and we don't know if it's going to make up for all those sales, but it's sure making a dent in things, and I think by the end of the year we're going to find that overall sales, overall revenue in the music business is going to be higher than it's been in quite a long time. So, CD sales way down, going fast, but streaming revenue is making up for it, and we can all be thankful that the music business is not going the way people predicted. Matter of fact, it's going to be okay for a while. If you have any questions or comments, send them to questions@BobbyOInnerCircle.com. And don't forget to check out my 101 Mixing Tricks program, my other online video courses at BobbyOwsinskiCourses.com. Please check out my music industry and music production blogs as well. Just go to BobbyOwsinski.com to find the links where you can read excerpts from my books as well. Here's something that's interesting. It turns out that our musical preferences are learned. They're not built in, they're not hardwired as everyone thought. How did researchers find this out? Well, they went and they found an Amazon tribe, the Sumane, and this tribe is so remote that in fact there's no electricity, there's no Western civilization influences at all. The only way you can get there is by a canoe. Well, what they did is they took the residents, about 100 of them, of this tribe, and they began to play them tones. And they wanted to hear if the tribal members would in fact like or dislike consonant and dissonant intervals. And what they found out is that the tribal members had no preference between the consonant and dissonant intervals. Now, by dissonant, I mean minor seconds, tritones, things like that. Now, when they came back and they played the same thing to American college students, they found that they strongly preferred consonant intervals. So then they went back to Brazil, and they went to a town that was very near this deserted Amazon tribe. And this town, in fact, was heavily influenced by Western culture. But what they found was that the residents of this town, in fact, only slightly preferred consonant intervals. What this proves is that humans just aren't biologically programmed to prefer certain sounds, not like we thought. And up until this time, researchers always thought that we were kind of born with the inbred feeling for consonant intervals, chord changes, and the like. I, for one, am pretty happy to hear this because I'm so tired of 1-4-5 chord progressions that anything would be better, and I'd sure like Western ears to kind of open up so we can listen to things that are different than what we're used to. And like I say, 1-4-5 has become so boring. I kind of cringe anymore when I hear what might be the logical 1-4-5. Like I say, it gives me some hope that at some point in time, maybe our ears are going to evolve and maybe we won't be predisposed to consonant intervals. My guest today is engineer Ed Cherney, who's worked with the who's who of great artists that include Bonnie Raitt, the Rolling Stones, Eric Clapton, Bob Dylan, Willie Nelson, Elton John, Bob Seger, Sting, and even Spinal Tap, among many, many more. Ed has won 3 Grammys, an Emmy Award, 5 Tech Awards, and is a Tech Hall of Fame inductee. I spoke with Ed recently while he was on a walk around his home in Venice, California, and believe me, this is one of the best interviews that I've ever had on this show. It's funny, it's insightful, and it's all Ed Cherney. Was there a client that you had, or maybe a session that you did, where you felt that you learned the most from?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I was really lucky. It took me a long time to find any kind of success. Literally, I'll bet it took me 26, 36, almost 15 years until I was making a living, but until I had, a decent, the kind of success where, that big time success that put you in the big leagues. So it took me a long time, and boy, I had a lot of opportunities to learn from great people. Especially assisting. In Chicago, I got to sit behind guys like Barry Mraz, who was one of the first freelance engineer producers who was doing Styx and the Ohio Players, and this guy was, producer engineer. He really, knew his shit, and sitting behind him and seeing how he worked. And then when I moved to California, I was Bruce Swedien and Quincy Jones' assistant for 6 or 7 years.
Yeah.
And I had known Bruce in Chicago, and he was my mentor. So. That's like getting a PhD sitting behind those guys on Michael Jackson's Off the Wall record, and Rufus and The Dude and Patty Austin, and so many of those great records that they were making then. So that's going to really add to your arsenal in terms of giving you perspective. How to treat people, what a great arrangement is, what a great song is, what a great performance is, what a great mix is. And how to and the business behind it, how to run your career like it's a business. I got to see that. And after that, I got to, a couple people took me, I got to do jingles. I spent a bunch of years doing jingles. So one day you're recording an orchestra, and the next day you're doing a polka band. The next day you're doing a rock band. The next day you're doing a gospel choir. And the next day you're doing an opera singer. And you have to do it in 4 minutes. You know what I mean? You have to get your shit together fast. So those things, just the amount of confidence that you get, and being conversant in a lot of different styles of music and having to get it quickly. Where I really got the most, Ry Cooder, I think, really opened my eyes to a lot of stuff, and really opened my eyes to how good I wasn't and how much I needed to grow. I met him. He got hired to do a jingle. It was a Delco commercial, and he was looking for an engineer, and he was asking around for somebody kind of young and who he could relate to, and I got introduced to him, and I did this commercial with him, and it went well, and we got along, and we became pretty good friends. And he was a couple months later, he was going to do a record called Get Rhythm, and he hired me to engineer it, and that was the first full record that I recorded it and mixed it, recorded every sound on it, recorded the whole thing and mixed it. Before then, maybe you'd mix a song, you'd do a tracking, you'd do an overdub, in terms of records, and that's the first one I got to do from beginning to end. And Cooder is, he's an American treasure, and not only is he a fucking genius, but he hears things a certain way, and it's in a real way that's unconventional. In a way that I'd never worked before, and trying things, distorting things, and just making things really different and odd. And the musicians on that were Jim Keltner and Van Dyke Parks and Jorge Calderon and Flaco Jimenez, these wonderful musicians, and making this music that was really different. And I really had to grow into it, and I didn't get it at first. And and he kind of gets you by the throat, makes you understand. And that was the thing that I learned the most, that how to take chances, how to be different, there's no right way to do anything, and how to really serve the music and serve the musicians and get out of your comfort zone. So I'd have to say for me, that was a total turning point for everything.
Was this before you worked with Bruce and Quincy?
No, this was after.
After,
But
really?
but with Bruce and Quincy, I was the assistant engineer.
Yeah.
I was assisting, and with Cooder, this was the first record that I got to be the engineer, the guy sitting in the hot seat for the whole record.
Well,
tracking it, overdubbing it, mixing.
You said that you had to learn to hear in a different way. What was so different?
Well, I remember going in and with Cooder, it was at Studio 2 at Ocean Way. Great room, great console. I was still young. I didn't understand how great that room was. And I went in there and I set it up a certain way. And when he came in and musicians came in, I was ready to go. And he took one look at it and went, nah. I think I had to reset the room up 2 or 3 different times. Move the drums over here, put something over there, and then he had me, like the drums, I got kind of a clean and clear drum sound, and he brought in this ghetto blaster that had a microphone in it. It was a Sony Super Scope, and it recorded stuff, and it had the most awful compressed sound you ever heard in your life. And he had me hang that over the drums, and that was gonna be the basis of my drum sound. This awful thing, and I couldn't believe it. I had these great microphones, and he was gonna make me do this and record it through a Sony Super Scope. It was the nastiest sounding thing you ever heard. And I kind of resisted at first, but man, he was so right. It was such a cool sound, and it added to the music and added to the record that it never would have dawned on me at that point to do things like that, to take chances like that. And that changed me forever. That now I'm willing to try anything, and nothing's wrong. You serve the music. If it sounds right, it is right. If it sounds broken and it works, use it. It freaked my mind. It just opened up my mind. And I resisted it at first. I was difficult. Oh no, you can't. How can you do that? What the hell is the matter with me? Why did I have to go through that? But thank God he was there, and I did, because it opened the door for me to have all the success and have the career I have today.
That's pretty amazing, actually, that you would have that experience, considering you already had some great experiences prior to that people would think, as you said, you went through your PhD, sitting behind Bruce and Quincy and Barry Mraz. I didn't even know about Barry Mraz. You worked with him. So,
yeah, at Paragon in Chicago, and that was a great opportunity. And I started out. I got hired there. I got hired to clean bathrooms. So I absolutely started at the bottom. And worked my way up to assistant over a few years. But the way Ry wanted to do things was just entirely different than the way Quincy and Bruce were.
Yeah.
They made sounds that were kind of pristine and grooving in a different way. It was just a very different perspective. To screw it up, distort it, mess it up, rhythmically make it feel odd, and it took me a minute to figure it out. At first I thought, he's crazy. And then I realized that he's a genius, and I should shut my mouth and open my ears, and I'd be a lot better off. And I did that, and being around guys like Jim Keltner and Flacco and Van Dyke, who also had, a real different take on things that I didn't have. And those guys had a lot more imagination than I was ever born with. So it just opened my eyes and opened my mind, freaked my mind, opened me up to so many other ways to make music, and not be afraid to try things and not be afraid to be different.
Was that your first gig then as an independent engineer?
Well, no, I've been working as an independent engineer, and I've worked on records, and maybe not great records, but you work as a journeyman. I got brought in to record overdubs, to record a vocal, maybe to, you know what I mean? I worked, but I never was hired to be the guy to do a record from beginning to end like that.
Yeah.
With who I considered a big artist.
Yeah.
I was working on records, but with minor league artists, not great artists at the time, guys that hadn't made it, and and doing bits and pieces, but not being the guy, the cat.
Well, what I'm trying to get at is, you went from being an assistant then at Westlake. What was the catalyst for you going independent?
I couldn't sit in a room anymore. Sitting behind a lot of guys that were coming in and were firsting that I kind of knew more than they did.
Mm-hmm.
But I just, as an assistant, it becomes a time. You can't, and all the assistants I know go through that you just can't sit in the room behind anyone anymore. You're bored, you know the patch bay, you're setting up, you're just serving the engineer, and you go, you know what, it's time for me to not do this anymore, because I can't take it. I can't sit in this room anymore as the assistant. And also, you know what happened? I was assisting here. Here's a great guy to assist for, is Mick Guzowski.
Oh yeah.
Guzowski is a genius, is a fucking genius, and I assisted him on a couple Chuck Mangione records and some other ones. But Mick had a jingle client that came out from New York about 1 week a month. And Mick got too busy for him. And Mick, is just a act of kindness and confidence in me, kind of turned me over to this guy. So all of a sudden, in the week that this guy would come out, I was doing jingles with him. I think I was making $25 an hour, and as an assistant at Westlake, maybe I was making $5 an hour, maybe. And all of a sudden, in a week, I could make as much as I was making, in 2 months working at Westlake.
Yeah, yeah.
So I got to, so it kind of handed a client. So I had a client doing jingles, and that's what enabled me to go freelance.
So did you find it a shock going from what you're doing at Westlake, working on records, to all of a sudden working on jingles, because it's, apples and oranges in a way?
Yeah, well, we were also doing jingles at Westlake. In those days, jingles came in the studio, and it was a tracking date, and and the clients were there, so I was assisting on jingles. So I was ready for it. In Chicago, during the day, it was all jingles. So you learned how to move fast, set up fast. Jingles, you had to move really quick, and you had to learn how to edit tape. You'd cut 2 minutes of music and then cut a 20-second spot and a 10-second spot and a 30-second spot and a 45-second spot, with a razor blade. And so I had to do that and learn how to do that really quick. So it was a great way to learn how to edit. And I became an ace editor, on tape. So, I had all the skills ready to go, except for sitting in that chair,
Yeah.
I could do everything else, but I'd never really sat in that chair. So the only way to get good at it is sit in that chair and mess up. And there's a lot of things you've got to know. There's psychology of it, getting people to be confident in you, being able to see 10 seconds in the future, to be ready to do what the next thing is, and to be actual, to get balances, to get good sounds, to make music, to make it sound like something, make it feel like something. And as the assistant doing the edits, doing those things, you're doing everything except that, sitting there and actually recording and mixing and, balancing the music and making it sound and feel like something. So it wasn't really a shock. It took me so long. By the time I was sitting there, I was pretty much ready to do it.
Yeah, yeah. When you think back to the sessions with Michael, was there something that sticks out? Was there an incident? Was there something that you learned? Was there just something that you think automatically when you think of those sessions?
Well, I can think of the kindness of Quincy. Now, I got to share that Bruce was totally kind and giving. When he would turn a knob, when I was in there with them, my consciousness was on everything that was going on, not just the patch bay and plugging in the microphone and getting the lunch order right, but when he was EQing, when he was balancing, my ear was on everything that he was doing too. So I was paying attention to that. But you know what, the way Quincy treated people, and especially the way he treated me, I was just some kid, just the assistant, and he treated me with kindness and respect, and and kind of included me away in the process. And one of my jobs at night was, Michael, to take our day's work on a cassette and drop it off at Quincy's house at night on my way home, 10 o'clock at night. And, I had if you were in with Quincy, you had a nickname. My nickname was Big Julie. I don't know if I'll tell you how I got that name, but I'd show up at his house and ring the bell, and Big Julie! He'd invite me in, and we'd drink some wine, and, have a hit of a reefer, and he would talk to me. We would talk about music and things and people and stuff until 3, 4 in the morning.
Wow.
And that happened many times. And it moved me that he treated this nobody kid assistant engineer like a human being, you know, and it meant everything to me. It meant so much to be included in the process. And, you know, and I've always tried to treat people well, but it really hit it home that the way you got the most out of people was by treating them well, by treating them like you wanted to be treated, no matter how lowly they were or how important they were. Quincy treated everybody the same. That was the thing that I got out of it, you know, the way. And he was at the top of his career as a producer then, and I saw how other people, you know, a fraction as accomplished and talented as him, treat people like shit. And just learning that it was okay to be kind and have empathy, you know, for people. It was okay. Yeah. And I'll tell you, you know what had a profound effect, that many times when the record was done, Quincy would invite the label executives down to the studio, his accountants, anyone that worked for him that had any kind of stake in his life, and he'd invite them down and play the record for him, you know, when it was done or almost done, and ask people what they thought. And he would listen to what they say, give them the opportunity. And they would leave thinking that they had some vested interest in it. Whether he listened to them or not, he was inclusive, and he included them in the process. And I got that, you know, I got that. That was really important to me, and really kind of set the tone for my life and my career of how I wanted to be. I couldn't always be that way. Sometimes, you know, my ego probably got in the way, but, you know, that set the tone for the kind of person I wanted to be and the kind of professional I wanted to be.
You know, the only time I ever really integrated with Quincy was I did an interview with him, and it was at his house, and there was a crew of maybe 6 or 7 people there. And at the end, I felt that I knew him. There's a special connection, and everybody in the crew had, and we're, you know, no one was ever going to see him again, probably, or work with him again, probably. But he treated everybody like almost like we were family. It was unbelievable. I know what you mean. There's just that feeling that, you know, you were special. He made you feel good. It's dynamite.
Yeah. Yeah, and I would do anything for him, you know?
Yeah.
You know, if he asked me to kill some motherfucker, I would have considered it. And that's how he got the most out of his musicians, you know, out of whoever he was producing, out of Michael, because, you know, you could tell that he genuinely cared and genuinely liked people. That's the big thing, you know. Aside from the technical things, that is the most important thing I got out of those years, out of anything I ever did, was, you know, his kindness and his empathy for people.
Well, let's jump ahead a little bit to Bonnie. Well, first of all, how did that all come about? How did you get on that project, A Nick of Time?
Well, I'll tell you what. So I talk about, you know, working for Ry Cooder and doing a jingle for him and then making a record for him, and that was the first one from beginning to end that I did. And you know, if I knew then what I know now, you know, almost 30 years later, it would have been a better record, I'm sure. But I learned a lot from it. So, you know, he was playing slide guitar and different things like that. And because I did a Ry Cooder record, I got a call from David Lindley, actually from Linda Ronstadt, who was going to be producing a David Lindley record. And I love David Lindley. And he had a band called El Rayolex.
Yeah.
And this was probably a month after doing Cooder. I get a call to go have a meeting with Linda Ronstadt and David Lindley. They're going to make a record with El Rayolex. And they hired me to do the record, and I loved David Lindley, and I became very good friends with him and with Ronstadt. So we made a record called Very Greasy. And I was better at it by then. Oh boy, you know, I started to figure it out a little bit, you know. I caught on, and it's a pretty good sounding and feeling record. It was underappreciated at the time. I just recently I heard something. It was on the radio on XM, and the DJ, I forget what channel, the DJ said, this is a record that never received its due, and one song in particular that was really great and was never appreciated for what it was, and started playing. He did a version of Papa Was a Rolling Stone, and I had to pull my car over, and it made my heart beat fast. It sounded and felt so good, and you know what? And I was thinking the whole time, did they have this remixed? Did somebody else remix this? Did I do this? And I hadn't heard it in a long time. And on one hand, I was like really excited that how great this sounded, and on the other hand, I was deathly afraid that it wasn't me, that they had it remixed. And there's an instrumental breakdown, and I remember there's something I did with a jawbone or something, and I panned it across, or had the reverb pan across or something. And when it got to that, and when it did that, I knew that it was that it was my mix. And I almost started to cry because it was so, it was really good. And a lot of times, but when I finish a record, I feel in a lot of ways that I failed, and it doesn't. Because there's no more surprises. There was a time it was great, but by the time you're done, you've probably listened to it 100 too many times. So, there's no good surprises in it, and every lick, and it doesn't have that it doesn't move you emotionally like it did maybe when you first heard it the first 20 times. But so I did this record with David, and the record came out great. And about 3 months later, I had known that I love Bonnie Raitt, and I knew that she was going to make a record. And I had mutual friends, people that knew her, and I started bugging them. Anyone that I knew that knew Bonnie, I started bugging them to, hey, I hear Bonnie's making a record. Boy, I'd be perfect to do that. And I just kind of put it out there, and I didn't hear anything. And then one day, I came home to my apartment in Santa Monica, and the phone rang, and they say, Ed, this is Don Was. And I loved the Was Not Was. I knew who Don was. He said, listen, I'm going to be producing a Bonnie Raitt record. You want to come and meet us for lunch tomorrow? And, let's talk, and, And he said, hey, you want to, okay. So met him the next day. We had lunch, and we hit it off. I think, the lunch lasted about 3 hours, and we just laughed and had the best time, me, Don, and Bonnie. And they hired me to do the record, which was nick of time. And by that time, I was primed. I was ready to do that record, just from Cooder and Lindley in particular. And I knew what guitars were supposed to sound like. I knew, slide guitars. So I'd been schooled by two guys that were the greatest at it. So that's kind of how I got that Bonnie Raitt record. I kind of laid it out there, but by happenstance, I think because I was getting the Ry Cooder and the David Lindley stamp of approval that they used me, it made it okay for Bonnie to hire me. And that particular record, boy, everything just kind of came together. The material was great, and she was great, and Don and I just hit it off. We were both from the Midwest, about the same age, loved the same kind of music, had the same kind of experiences growing up. Jews from the Midwest, me from Chicago, here from Detroit. Middle class upbringing, but being influenced by Motown and our rhythm and blues and those kind of things. We just hit it off and understood each other in a lot of ways more than you would understand each other verbally. Just on a deep down soulful level, we knew each other.
Did you know that it was going to be a big hit? Could you feel it when you were doing it? Because there's sometimes you just know that magic is going to happen.
I knew that the music was moving me, and I knew what we were doing was musically really great. And this was back in Studio 2, and I really kind of understood how great that room sounded then, and understood how great that console is. And when I worked with Cooder, I didn't get it, but between Cooder and working with Bonnie, I'd worked, on other Neve consoles, and I started to understand how great the equipment was, and how great that room sounded, and how great that console sounded, and how to work that room. And I knew that it was great, and I knew that it sounded great. And one of the things that told me is the musicians kept coming in and wanted to hear the songs played back, and that doesn't always happen, and we're playing it back, and everybody's high-fiving and dancing, and we knew that, that musically it felt good, and we were getting performances of a lifetime out of her. And, that I knew it was great, but I had no aspirations of that it would do that. It didn't even dawn on me, that what it would do commercially. It just didn't dawn on me. All I was interested in was making great music anyway, and pleasing her and pleasing Don and pleasing the band. So I didn't have a clue.
That record was, it still is. It's amazing. It just works.
It didn't interest me. My interest just wasn't there. It shows you what kind of a putz I am, that, I wasn't thinking commercially or things like that. I just was thinking in terms of, I wanted to make great music with her and please them and make her happy especially. At the end of the day, I knew I did that. And I knew that I had a new best friend in Don Was, and his career was, that his career took off with that record, and so did mine. Obviously, Bonnie's did. And together we went on to make, 4 more Bonnie Raitt records that were really good, but we also went on to do Iggy Pop and Bob Dylan, and I mean, you name it, Bob Seger, and you name it, we were doing them. And so we had just this wonderful run together. But doing it now, I didn't know. But when the record took off, boy, it sure was exciting. That's the first time when you get a hit record like that, Bobby. It's really exciting. You're young and your career is really kind of just starting out and having that. And especially after working so many years, in obscurity, having that happen, and to hand it to Bonnie that she shared that success. She let people know who her team was and who she did the record with, and she was really generous. And there wasn't a big budget, and after it was successful, she wrote me a big check. We did that record pretty darn cheap. And at the Grammys, she always acknowledged me and always, acknowledged Don, but she acknowledged me and really opened a lot of doors for me by doing that.
Very cool.
So, I'll be forever in her debt.
Yeah.
I'll be forever in her debt.
So then the Stones. So that was a different way of working for you, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it sure was. Don got that ticket. He did Voodoo Lounge, and I think that he got, we had this success with Bonnie and with probably, a dozen other artists that their records did really good that we did together. And Don got a call from the Stones for Voodoo Lounge. I didn't do that record. I think he asked me to do that with him, and my mom got sick, and he was going to Dublin for a number of months, and I couldn't do it. I stayed in Los Angeles to help take care of my mother. So I didn't do Voodoo Lounge. He did that with Don Smith, and by the way, it was a great record. And Don Smith is the late great Don Smith, another, genius engineer.
Yeah.
Engineer, producer, and mixer. So he did it with Don, and that was a great record. I don't know if I was ready to do a Rolling Stones record yet, but I got brought in after that. On the tour, on that Voodoo Lounge tour, is when I got brought in.
On the tour?
What was that? As a matter of fact, you know what? We did Bonnie Raitt's Luck of the Draw album, and that was, I think, 2 years after Nick of Time. And that record did better than Nick of Time. It won a bunch of Grammys, although it wasn't the breakout. Nick of Time was the breakout for her. But Luck of the Draw was one of those records, and something to this day I'm really proud of. That you can play that for me on my deathbed, and it still brings me to still takes my breath away. The material, the playing, Richard Thompson's on there, and Paul Brady, and the material and her performances, and the band was unbelievable, and I nailed it. The engineering part, I'm just really proud of that. I don't think I've done that good since. So that night we went to the Grammys. Don and I went to the Grammys together, and I don't know if that won Record of the Year, but Don got Producer of the Year Grammy, and I got a Best Engineered Recording Grammy. And after the Grammys, we got on a plane and flew to Japan to meet the Rolling Stones. They were on the Voodoo Lounge tour, and at that time, everyone was doing these unplugged records. They were very popular.
Yeah,
they were going on, and the Stones wanted to do that kind of record, an unplugged record. So they had a couple weeks off in Japan, and they booked a studio in Japan, and they wanted to go in the studio and set up acoustically and go through all their material and just play with the material and arrangements and see how it would work. So Don brought me to do that, which was, we won Grammys, got on a plane that night to go to Japan to meet the Stones. I think we got to Japan about maybe 11 o'clock at night. We went straight to the studio, and I had been sending diagrams with to the Japanese in the studio how I thought the best way to set it up. So it was all set up and ready to go, and I think we got to the studio about 3 a.m. and walked in. And for me, Don had already worked with them, so he had a relationship, and I walked in. I felt like I was walking onto Mars. Actually, I was expecting. I was sitting behind the console. I was expecting for someone to tap me on the shoulder the whole time and go, "What the fuck are you doing here?" and throw me out. Hey, get the fuck out of here.
Yeah.
But that being said, and they filmed it too. That recording came for some reason really great. I really nailed it. And, I mean, it's the Rolling Stones, for God's sake. And that material, it's hard to miss it. But it just, for some reason, it came together, and my part was really good. And I broke through. So we finished that, and that record, that may have come out, as bootlegs and dribs and drabs, but there's a great record out there of the 4 or 5 days that we spent in the studio doing that stuff. So they thought, well, here's a way to do it. We're playing in the Tokyo Dome in 2 days, and how about, why don't you get a truck, and in the middle of the show, we'll go out to the front of the stage and we'll do a mini set acoustically. So we'll see how that works. So I got a truck and set it up in the Tokyo Dome, and up to that point, I hadn't done a lot of live recording. I did front of house, I did, but I, and I'd record, use the truck at the Roxy and different places, but nothing like the Tokyo Dome. Anyway, I set it up, and I figured it out pretty quickly. You need big balls, man, to do that.
Yeah, right.
It's some of the scariest shit you're ever going to do.
Yeah.
Fortunately, it wasn't a live broadcast, but just, I wanted to do a great job, and I didn't want to miss a note of music. So they did it, and it didn't, that part of it, it was okay, but it wasn't great. So they kind of thought about it, how they're going to do it. So they decided that they're going to do a whole unplugged show and do that at the Paradiso in Amsterdam. Maybe 4 weeks or 5 weeks later when they were in Europe. And they brought me in to do that. So I went to Amsterdam with Don, and I got a truck, a place called Eurosound, who I actually became very good friends with and ended up using all over the world. It was a great truck, kind of Peter Brandt ran it. And then we went to Amsterdam and set up in a warehouse for, I guess, about a week or 10 days, maybe a couple weeks, and where they rehearsed the material, and then went into the Paradiso, and wired it all up and mic'd it all up and shot it, also filmed it, which became the Stripped album. So that came out, so that's the first record that I did with them.
Yeah.
And then, for some reason, I wasn't known for that. I kind of became their live recording engineer. Whenever they went into a new market, they would do a live broadcast, and they started, recording a lot of different shows. And so I went out on the road with them. I'd go back and forth and go out on the road with them for 4 or 5 days, and I'd come home for a couple of weeks and then meet them somewhere else. And I kind of traveled the world going out and being their live recording engineer. So I started doing live broadcasts and a lot of live recording for them. And I did what ended up becoming something called 4 Flicks, which was part of that tour, I think, or maybe the next tour that became, where they played in small clubs and they played in arenas, 3,000, 4,000 seat arenas, and then 10,000 seat arenas, and then 100,000 seat stadiums. And I started recording those all over the world and doing live broadcasts. And then I brought them back home and fixed them and mixed them, and that became the 4 Flicks DVD and CD, which actually did really well for them. So I spent the next 15 years doing, going out on their tours and doing their live recordings. And I lasted a long time. I think Clear Mountain did it for a while. David Hewitt did some of them, but for some reason I ended up being their live recording engineer, which was, a wonderful experience. I love those guys, and that was what a way to see the world. And I love them. They were loyal, and really, I just loved being with them, and they treated me like part of the family, which, I really appreciated, and I would do anything for them. So, and then in that time, we did Bridges to Babylon. And Don hired me. I started out as the engineer of Bridges to Babylon, but I had to leave about halfway through because I got hired to record and produce an artist that I've been working with. So I left on the Bridges to Babylon to go do this other record as a producer. And then I came back and mixed some of it, and Rob Fraboni did some of it. I think there was probably half a dozen different engineers that had worked on it.
Didn't you tell me that they came in, they didn't have any songs, and they just jammed? They sort of put it together after they listened to everything? Yeah,
there was some of that. Mick would come in with completed songs and pretty good demo recordings, and and Keith would come in with a lick or an idea for a chorus or a bridge, and there was a lot of just, kind of sitting there all night and just playing and figuring it out and editing and, so it would go through a lot of permutations to get it. I couldn't exactly tell you how a song would arise, but eventually it would.
Yeah.
It could be sitting there all night with Keith, just him working on a lick or two licks, and and Mick was a little more working man about it. He'd show up with the goods, and they have very different ways of working and approaching what they do, but together, it eventually would work out. And it was kind of Don's job in a lot of ways to figure out the two approaches and make music out of it.
Were they ever in the room at the same time, playing at the same time?
Yeah, all the time.
All
the time. What would happen, and we typically, I worked on 7 or 8 records with them, in the studio over time, and they'd try to start it out with them together. But then, Mick liked to come in earlier and leave earlier, and Keith wanted to come in later and stay later. So, as it wore on, Mick would come in from 10 to 5, 10 to 6, and Keith would come in from 4 to 8 or 9 or 10 in the morning.
Wow, that's tough on you and Don then. Jeez, wow.
Well, yeah, and it's easy to get in trouble when you're doing that. To get in over your head a little bit.
Yeah. Was there anything about the Stones when you're recording them that was different from everybody else?
Well, Charlie's a drummer. You hear 4 beats and it's Charlie Watts.
Yeah.
You hear 4 notes, it's Keith Richards.
Yeah.
You hear 1 syllable and it's Mick Jagger. They're, just like what they look like, what their faces. You couldn't conjure them up. You couldn't make it up. But they're so unique and they sound so unique, and unlike just about anybody, anywhere, at any time in the entire history of humanity. The Rolling Stones, boy, they are so identifiable by the way they look and the way they sound.
You've had such a great career.
I don't think anybody else is like that.
You've had such a great career with so many great artists and worked on so many big hits. Is there one that stands out as the most fun?
I got to say that a lot of the time that when Don and I were together, no matter who the artist was, for some reason we were having a great time together. I thought we were making great records, and we were spent a lot of our time just laughing. And I remember that very rarely was it drudgery. And making records, it can become drudgery sometimes.
Yeah.
Comp and vocals or doing the editing and putting it together. But I got to tell you, my experiences for the most part with Don, we were always having a great time no matter where we were. I always remember, maybe he wasn't having a great time, but I always was. I just always remember it being fun and interesting and looking forward to being in there for the most part. It's hard work and it's a lot of responsibility, and I can't say that, it's fun. It's serious business, and you have people's careers in your hand, and you're trying to do your best. And even though, I like to joke around and laugh, I'm dead serious when I go in the studio with an artist. It may not look at it, but inside, man, it's dead on serious business. So, fun and laughing it up. Boy, we try to laugh it up. And the truth is you become really close with all the artists that you work with.
Yeah.
You're in a room with them for an extended period of time, and you love them as people, and so it's fun being in the room with people that you really care for, making music that you really care for, and trying to make something that is going to last longer than you. So, but off the top of my head, fun, what a great way to make a living. But for the most part, it's always been fun.
Is there something that isn't fun or hasn't been fun or something you don't look forward to?
Overdubs. I mean, at this point, overdubs and tuning vocals, I don't want to do that. The way the business has changed.
Yeah.
Those kind of records with everyone in the room and everybody playing and working on music, that's the best part of it. When you disappear and, you don't have a thought about yourself, but you and a bunch of other people that you really care for are doing something together. That's the best part of it. The drudgery of, this guy can't sing today, we're working with a singer that can't really sing. That's the kind of shit that's not fun. But when you're working with great artists, it's always good. It's when you're working with people that aren't that good and maybe take themselves really a little too seriously, then it's not fun.
Yeah.
Now, the beauty is, back in the day, before the turn of the last century, you could make a lot of money and you would put up with a lot of shit because the money was so good.
Yeah.
And then, when the budgets dried up and the money dried up, you didn't have to put up with that so much. If it wasn't worth it, like this, you don't, when somebody was paying you a lot of money, you'd put up with a lot of abuse and a lot of shit. But when they're not paying you that much, you're not going to do it. I'd rather go home.
Yeah.
So maybe that's the best part about the downturn of our industry for guys like me. But, working with assholes. But for the most part, I've just worked with wonderful people. And, continue to do so. I continue to totally care and love the people that I work with. And that's the best part of it, going in with people that you really care for. And the bigger and the more talented they are, it translates to the kind of people that they are, too. Good, moral, fun, smart, caring, empathetic people.
Yeah. Well, you continue to work, and I know you have a lot of projects.
I'm doing a little jazz record, but this last year, has been an unbelievable year. And I got to do some, the way it works right now, you don't get to track and record, do whole records, guys like me. A lot of times you brought in a mix or you track, but I did a Willie Nelson record that I got to record and mix. His Gershwin record that's still on the charts, that did really well, went to #1 on the jazz charts. And I got to do a Rides record, that's Stephen Stills supergroup, with him and Kenny Wayne Shepherd and Barry Goldberg.
Yeah.
And heroes, Stephen Stills for God's sake. But growing up, Barry Goldberg was a big influence on me. He was from Chicago and, Jewish kid into the blues, I love Barry Goldberg, and getting to be friends with him and work with him and be in the studio and making a record like that was wonderful. And then, and being able, and getting an Emmy, working on getting to co-produce Queen Latifah and doing the music for this HBO film, Bessie Smith, for Bessie, which was great. So, just different kind of projects show up. I got to do a big band record at Capitol. I just did a Brazilian record. So, the phone rings. That continue to work and doing different things, not just mixing, but getting to record some too.
Yeah.
And doing a whole record, and which has been pretty great.
That's awesome, Ed. It really is.
But it used to be, you'd get a call, you'd be booked up, you'd know what you were doing next month, and now the calls come like, well, what are you doing tomorrow? It comes, it works kind of that way.
Yeah.
And the negotiation is, they'll call you and how much do you want to do this record? And the negotiation, well, what do you got? Well, we got this much. You say, okay, or no, I can't do it.
Yeah.
So that part of it has changed.
Yeah.
But another good part of it though is I don't get hired by labels anymore. I get hired by the artist, and that's all I have to please now is the artist.
Yeah, right.
Which is, I don't have to sit in front of a committee. I don't have a committee of promotion guys, radio promotion guys judging what I do. So that simplifies it in a lot of ways. That I know who I'm working for, and I know who I got to please.
Okay, last question. What is the best piece of
Yes, sir.
business advice, the best piece of business advice, or something about music, the best music advice that either someone imparted to you or you learned along the way?
Well, Swedeen always said, nobody leaves the studio dancing to the console, which has been great advice. It used to be they think the gear, and it's not that. Nobody leaves the studio dancing to the gear, and it's really that. But you know what? Swedeen also gave me the advice. He said, a lot of times, when we started out, it was a big party in the studio. Somehow you'd figure out a way to get paid, but everybody was up, and and it was a party in a lot of ways. And Swedeen really imparted on me that I should run my career like a business, and that meant paying my taxes, having my billing, having my business shit in order, When you made money, save it. And don't be a jagoff. Don't be a schmuck.
Yeah, yeah.
And I did that. And when things are dry, invariably all of us go through dry periods where you have weeks or months where the phone doesn't ring and you don't work. And because of that advice, I've been able to weather those periods and not have to get rid of my house or live in my car or have the IRS breathing down my neck. Run it as a business, run it responsibly. No matter what's going on in the background, no matter how much of a party is going on.
Great advice. Advice.
That was always, it was great advice, and I took it to heart. And I've seen too many people blow through everything they ever made and are left with nothing at the end of the day.
Yeah, yeah. That's for sure. And especially now, we see more people like that, unfortunately, that, when things are a lot drier. And you know what else? One thing I liked about working with you is, you talk about laughing and having fun. I laughed and had a lot of fun with you. And I'm sure that everybody feels the same way and has the same experience, which is why you work all the time, because people like working with you. I'm sure.
Yeah. I think a lot of times you might get hired more for your personality or your ability to get along and make people feel comfortable more than your raw technical ability.
Yeah. I don't doubt it.
I think there's a lot to be said. Certainly you need the chops, but, you need to get along with people. You need to like people. And you know what else, Bob? I think you need good mental health. And everything in this business, in particular, everything that we do, especially in the music business, somehow is designed to rob you of any self-esteem you may have.
Yeah.
We all get fired. You all get replaced. You may have done the best work of your life and know it, and you're sending the materials to somebody else to remix it or do it for whatever reasons. And it happens the same way with artists. I've seen some of the most talented people, not be able to get over and doing great work. And I don't know why that is, but this whole thing is designed to rob you of any self-esteem you have. And that's, and it's tempered at the same time. To do this well, you need plenty of confidence and you need plenty of self-esteem. And especially you need to be able to pick yourself up after being fired and failing or missing a gig that you should have or not getting hired or being replaced, and picking yourself up and finding a way to do it again and having the same amount of enthusiasm and confidence going in, and the same joy going in. And it's difficult, and you really have to struggle. But having good mental health is a big part of it.
To find out more about Ed, go to edcherney.com. That's EDCHERNEY, all one word, edcherney.com. Thanks for listening and being in my inner circle. Remember, if you have any questions or comments, please send them to questions@BobbyOInnerCircle.com. To listen to other episodes of Bobby Owsinski's Inner Circle, go to BobbyOwsinski.com and select the podcast tab, or go to BobbyOInnerCircle.com or find it in iTunes, Stitcher, Mixcloud, and Google Play. At BobbyOwsinski.com and BobbyOInnerCircle.com, you'll find a sign-up form for my newsletter and for alerts for new podcasts. This is Bobby Owsinski. I will see you next time.